They're listening. They were playing over at Genesis, which is our previous radio station, replays for the last 2 weeks, and I think they kept the archives. We were going to make sure the requests, those archives aren't there because they're scrambling all the dates up and so on. All the archives will be tagged, tracked, and cross-indexed over at Blueberry. So you'll be able to find all the old archives, but they'll also be searchable. So we also include other shows and interviews, like the show I did last week with John B. Wells over at his Caravan to Midnight and other programs. And those will also be searchable and present also in our archives, also cross-indexed. So, Ryan, let's get back into the move here now to talk about anti-aging. I mentioned in the last segment that our nutraceuticals are in the process. We're cracking the epigenetic code of what aging is. Aging is mineral deficiencies causing gene silencing with increasing shortening of the telomeres at the end of the buttons, at the end of your chromosomes, all these epigenetic phenomena, including oxidative damage and what we call mitochondrial dysfunction, which you can see on scanning electron microscopy, or organic acids. All of them, basically, we can step-by-step reverse. For example, one of the most important things is the mitochondrial energy. And we have CoQ10, the only CoQ10 in the world that's non-crystallizing or polymerizing. I used to have it made 25, 30 years ago at a compounding pharmacy. And what's funny is that we'd have to have it made so that you'd use it up pretty quickly within a few weeks, because by the end of a month, because we weren't able at that time to prevent polymerization, you lost most of its biological activity by the end of a month. And all of the other CoQ10s out there will crystallize and polymerize except ours. Also, we have the highest bioavailable form of CoQ10 ubiquinol, which is a water-soluble form. And we have also our other forms of carnitine. We have the IBS, slow-release carnitine. We've got the VascuCare carnitine. And, of course, we've got various forms of carnitine, ALC, acetylcarnitine, present in our Cognition Plus, and our separate ALC 1000, what I call mitochondrial energy formula. So, we also have D-ribose and NADH and so on. But let's talk about our CoQ10 first, because I think a lot of people don't realize, and this, by the way, includes some of these cardiologists, they know CoQ10 is destroyed by HMG-CoA reductase inhibitors, the statin drugs. And I've had a few requests, even on air in the last few weeks, to say, my doctor's putting me on statins. Your doctor is hurting you. They're uninformed. And if they were informed, a lot of times they might say, well, we'll throw a little CoQ10 in there. Our CoQ10 is the only CoQ10 that maintains its biological action after a month. That's scary, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, it's frustrating because it's, even with people trying to be knowledgeable and do well with taking CoQ10, the lack of ability to absorb the CoQ10 is dramatic. CoQ10 is a substance that loves to crystallize, which makes it impossible for the body to get it across, and so that's an advantage you can have with the NutriMedical lineup.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the same thing when we talk about things like generating bones. Our bone generator isn't just a calcium supplement. It's calcium, magnesium, hydroxyapatite with trace elements, silica, boron, manganese, and the adhesion hormones actually present that make bone. This is not just just a mineral supplement like people eating what I call the White Cliffs of Dover. Calcium carbonate. Which is not only ridiculous, it's actually dangerous. You're going to get metastatic calcification of your soft tissues, organs, and blood vessel walls. You won't with bone generator. And of course, we marry that up with full vitamin K2, minoquinone 7, Micelle D3, the drops, which was 1,000 unit per drop, or 5,000 units soft gel. And I recommend people take a pretty good dosage, especially in the fall and winter and spring. It takes 3 soft gels, 5,000 units each, twice a day, along with at least 3 to 6 after the meal, 30 to 40 minutes after a meal, so you get the maximum bicarbonate, which is the best time to absorb your minerals from the bone generator. And then take also our Myco D2, which is our mushroom-based vitamin D2. When people add the Collagen Max, and may add also Mountain Red Velvet, but Collagen Max especially, because 42% of the dry weight of your bone is collagen. It's like building a bridge without rebar. If you don't have the rebar, you're not going to build the proper, you can have dense bones, but they're not strong. It's like a bad contractor building a bridge without putting rebar steel in it because he wants to save money, and then the truck drives over it and crashes through on the cars below. Not a good idea. So let's talk about that. How to build bone. You got to have the building blocks and the enzymatic stimulants in order to do so. So, and same thing with teeth and enamel. If you want good enamel, you want our bone generator, Micelle D3, Myco D2, and full vitamin K2, and you also want to have you want to have also the proper minerals present, and that means Vitamin Mineral Max Minerals Plus. Without copper and zinc, for example, you can't build proper elastin and collagen and rebuild the enamel, because your teeth are a living thing. They're always rebuilding the enamel, which is 9 on the hardness scale below diamond. That's pretty hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy how hard it really is. But it's, people are misled, as you were saying, about the consistency of what makes up, proper bone. Everybody seems to, just fall into this calcium, and although it's the most abundant mineral that's found in bone, is not what makes up good quality bone.
Well, it's 2 to 1. It's for every 2 ions of calcium, there's 1 of magnesium. But that's not present in the North American diet. I mean, and the soils are depleted.
No.
We also can augment that. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, just in the not just adding more calcium to the regimen, but using something like the whole bone extract that you're going to find in the formulation for bone generator is critical, because it's got this ideal ratio, this naturally occurring ratio, versus just arbitrary amounts that have been stuffed into a capsule that people are taking. And so it's a fascinating formulation for what it can do, and that it's designed by nature. It's wonderful.
Really? Wow. Anything else happening that in terms of nutraceuticals? One of my favorites is Calmmind, and a lot of time it's able to. I like it with Brain Mag. I like the Calmmind Brain Mag together, 1-on-1. Calmmind will actually help people start induction for sleep, so we add melatonin TR afterward. Calmmind actually will help extinguish anxiety and fear, so it helps depression a lot. It also seems to stabilize blood sugar. Myo-inositol is a blood sugar stabilizer. And stress response. In other words, if you get overactive adrenal glands, Calmmind is one of the best things to reduce what we call hypercortisolemia, or stress response. So let's talk about Calmmind for a minute, because it's another one of our drinks, and I like the combination of Calmmind and Brain Mag. Often throw a scoop of each in. In fact, I have some in my drink right now, so I'm not speaking at Dr. Deagle level. I'm speaking at almost normal person level.
Calmmind has just been a home run for people. The name alone says, what a lot of people would like to have, which is being able to calm your mind down. And so the design of that formulation does rely, as you said, on an ingredient known as myo-inositol, which serves as a secondary neurotransmitting messenger molecule. And so it's making sure these messages, like lessening of anxiety or lessening of cravings and being able to calm somebody down, are being transmitted properly and being able to be communicated, and that the body expresses them properly. And I think most of us can say, hey, I don't think my body does a good job of that, because I get all swept up in craving something, or my mind starts racing with anxiety about certain things, and that's just not right. So unfortunately, a lot of people get stuck on pharmaceuticals, or they just self-medicate, and that's with the drugs, alcohol, or food. And so Calmmind really changes so much of that perspective. If there's this deficiency in there, this can be really a home run. It's also got a good amount of taurine in there, which is critical, magnesium glycinate, and a little bit of GABA, and a little bit of theanine in there as well. And so people just fall in love with this formulation. It's designed to be able to be used with kids on through the elderly.
You see, if you have a child that's hyperactive, and this is safe to give to children, if you have a hyperactive kid, you don't want to increase what's called class 2 cells of the reticular activating system by giving Cylert, Pemeline, or Adderall. These are dangerous drugs, and a lot of time as a child gets older in their teens and you stop them, they end up with problems with the law, mad behavior, because they're no longer de-repressing those cells, and they become very manic and out of control. Calmmind will bring you down. So if you have a tendency toward mania or broken sleep patterns at night, use the Calmmind during the day, because you should calm yourself down during the day. Make sure that your lights are out, say, an hour before bedtime, so you're not stimulating your brain with light, like television or bright lights in the room. And read, or just kind of meditate, or listen to music. And then when you get to sleep, you've taken your Calmmind, double it up, take 2 scoops of each in Brain Mag, and take 1 to 3 melatonin time release. You get 1 milligram slow and 4 milligrams, 1 milligram fast and 4 milligrams slow release. Melatonin, by the way, is protective of your central nervous system and your organs. When we were giving hyperbaric oxygen in Denver at our clinic that I was affiliated with, Melatonin was our primary antioxidant to protect against the oxidative stress of 100% oxygen. Isn't it interesting? Melatonin. And by the way, you can't make melatonin because it goes from tryptophan to serotonin to melatonin, and it's the adding of additional hydroxyl groups to the molecule. It's a enzyme called a pyrrolase, and it requires molybdenum for that alcohol dehydrogenase pyrrolase enzyme to work. Interesting, hey?
Yeah.
Which is, by the way, in Minerals Plus. So I tell people, and if we have to add a little extra copper, we use our thing called Copper Regenemax. But in most cases, the Minerals Plus and Vitamin Mineral Max. And what's nice is these are in the drinks. If you take the Life Support, and I like the Life Support Ageless and Glycemics, and then I'll throw in the NutriComplete, which is a complete red, greens, veggies, and it has a goji berry, which right after the anhydrous catechins in our NutriDefense, it's the most powerful antioxidant right up there with astaxanthin, which is in the Omega Supreme Krill. And ours has 2,000 micrograms of astaxanthin for blood vessel and brain protection, compared to only 117 in Mega Reds, which they advertise everywhere. Our nutraceuticals are so many light years ahead of anything else out there. It's amazing, isn't it?
Well, these are what people have heard about with nutritional supplements or being an option to help them, deal with the deficiency that's leading to a problem.
Right.
If you're not going to use a high quality version like you see with the NutriMedical line, you're up for probably a lot of frustration.
Now, I had a gentleman, a retired now firefighter lieutenant, that served at 9/11 and got hundreds of hours of exposure to high-intensity particles that are both, heavy metals as well as radiotoxins and xenotoxins, because there's 5,000 tons, not gallons, 5,000 tons in each of the World Trade Center towers. And so it volatilizing and burnt those towers, it also doubled the concentration of dioxins and dibenzofurans on the entire planet, not just South Manhattan, but the entire planet, which are antifolate. They block the folate methyl reductase enzyme. So it's like putting everybody in the world, but it's particularly in lower Manhattan, on chemotherapy, which is why the cancer rates went through the ceiling. The heavy metals caused the fibrous lung changes, and their DLCO, which is the diffusion capacity test on a lung function test, went south. So this man has a 40% loss in lung function, although he's otherwise trying to stay in a clean diet. And he wanted to do a chelation. I think, well, what you're taking right now, and he told me it was different herbals he's just doing on his own. That's not going to pull up the heavy metals. And I far prefer long-term oral chelation to IV with a Myers cocktail. Myers cocktail is only going to give you some of the minerals back, and you're only going to get what's called the free circulating non-sequestered compartment. You have to mobilize those heavy metals, and the best way to do that is mild hyperbaric oxygen, pulse magnetic field, and lumen photon therapy. And then you want to grab them as they mobilize with Max, and you want to grab the xenotoxins with a xenoestrogen detox, bio-LVR, SEM-ethyl, which is incredibly important as a methionine for pulling out heavy metals and chemicals. And you want to also maintain good bacteria, because if you've got mobilizing these toxins, they can become deconjugated in your lower bowel by anaerobic bacteria. So maintaining good, healthy lower bowel function with the living probiotic ultra is important. Because if you remobilize them, they're going to go back to your liver, back to your target organs, your brain, your pancreas, and they're going to cause organ dysfunction or cancer. So let's talk about Keeler Max and xenoestrogen detox for a moment, because I think people should, and bio-LVR and SEM-ethyl. For this gentleman needs to have a proper detox. He probably has not had packed red cell mineral and heavy metal testing done, which I'm going to recommend. He hasn't got a QRMA, which would be a strong way of measuring his organ function return. And he has no idea of the xenotoxins, so I can arrange for blood tests or other tests to actually send it off to the Dallas clinic with Dr. William Ray that actually can look at his fat biopsy, along with Dr. Schlonwhite at the AccuChem laboratories that actually I've been using for decades, that also does a contract work for NASA and the CIA and other government agencies to look at heavy metal toxins and volatile chemicals with nuclear magnetic spectroscopy and high-pressure chromatography. So you can actually see, if you don't have objective testing, you really don't know if what you're doing is working. And so someone like him is like a ticking time bomb. If you get clear, you can hear tick, tick, tick. That's because something bad's going to happen unless we get those toxins out of his body, not just loss of kidney lung function. So let's talk about Keeler Max and xenoestrogen detox for a minute.
Well, Keeler Max, as you say, there's such bioaccumulation that's going on, and people are familiar with the term detoxification. Usually that's more referring to the liver, And being able to address the heavy metals in a safe and effective oral format, that's what Keylor Max can do for the body. And it's been it can be very remarkable for a lot of individuals that have never been able to help remove and lower these levels of challenging metals in our bodies. I mean, aluminum is one of the most prevalent things we also see out there, just from all the canned beverages and stuff like that that are in our environment that we consume from and so forth. So another key area that we know we're getting constant exposure from as well.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's also we call transcontinental tropospheric industrial heavy metal and toxic chemical and nanoparticle pollution. So, for example, 83% of the mercury, and this is the U.S. Geological Survey, as a member of our Academy of Environmental Medicine 12 years ago in Colorado Springs, presented papers that showed that 83% of the mercury in our veggies comes from China, and we're using dirty coal. Isn't that crazy? Dirty coal from China. So, because they don't have scrubbers there, because they don't lack environmental regulations, they're polluting the heck out of their cities. So some cities, like in Beijing, they had to shut down a lot of the industry and the traffic because you could accumulate a half an inch to an inch or more of rubber dust in your car just by parking it in downtown Beijing. A lot of people walk around with masks on or even oxygen cylinders so they can breathe, because it's not really a good situation. A lot of these people are going to get very, very serious and premature illnesses. And I don't know why they're doing this experiment on their population, because, if you poison your population and they all start to get old or sick prematurely, it's going to be very, very bad for your culture and your population.
Yeah.
They're racing ahead. There's this, what I call this industrial giant of China, but they're doing it in a very unreasonable way. So 3/4 of their water systems in their big cities are now poisoned to the point where it's not safe and reasonable. So detox, thermal saunas and pulse magnetic, they sell all kinds of ones. Most of them are junk in China because they have all kinds of, we call unreasonable competition. They don't have validation from independent scientific agencies or anti-aging agencies, so most of the stuff they produce is not good. It's garbage. Interesting, eh? Which is why, believe it or not, if they want things like our nutraceuticals are made in America. So we ship to China, we ship to Malaysia, we ship to these countries because they know we're not going to mess around with regulations, because we have a corrupt regulatory system for our nutraceuticals. We have internal certification. So when we make a supplement, we have all kinds of validation with our laboratories that goes way beyond what's necessary from the regulatory authorities here in America. So they know it's going to be safe if we ship to Europe or China or elsewhere. What's interesting, some of the original research and some of the base components came from China, but they know it's not safe to get products that are made in China. Interesting, eh? That's almost humorous, but it's kind of bad. I mean, in the profit motive, they'll make out garbage and sell it, and then, of course, when you tick off your customers because it doesn't work or it's toxic, like, remember they added melamine to some of the dog food and so on. They killed a lot of dogs because melamine's toxic. It looks like protein, but it's not protein. Well, the same thing goes with vitamins. If you use the wrong strain of the herbal, if you don't validate that every batch has the right biomolecules in it, if you have a wrong delivery system or there's toxins present in it, it's not going to be good for you. Another area that's, I think, really important is the area of what do you call prostate and male function. And a lot of men don't realize how rapidly the xenotoxins are accumulating in their body to cause, we call, enlargement of the prostate. So the xenoestrogen detox, prostate flow, usually 1 or 2 soft gels twice a day at least, to 3 times a day, and use of the hormone synergy to make sure your male hormone doesn't convert to female, which, by the way, will also cause your prostate to grow. And then things like Allicin Med to kill off the toxins in the prostate, and Keylor Max and xenoestrogen detox, because the prostate, like the bottom of the sink, like the J thing at the bottom of your sink, collects a lot of garbage. And your prostate gland is going to filter a lot of blood flow and accumulate heavy metals, biotoxins, and endocrine disruptors. So by the 7th decade, 1 in 7 males has got an aggressive cancer, and by the 7th decade, virtually half have at least a benign cancer of the prostate going. So, important stuff. When we come back, we'll close off with a short segment. Do go to NutriMedical.com for all your listening and video and other pleasures. Do sign up for the live stream, our Blueberry podcast. Sign up also for Vimeo. You're going to be amazed at all the things we're providing for you free. I asked you on a little early if he's available. We have lots to talk about because the issues of the election cycle are going to tie in with healthcare. And I always get interesting calls. I get whistleblowers and inside. I get people that are watching the blogosphere videos, etc. And we had one lady, Susan, who is possibly listening on the archives. And when she she talked to Michelle and she said, you should be aware that in the Walmart stores and some stores across the country, they're already doing scanning for chips. They actually have a chip chair for scanning, and they ask healthcare questions. People should be aware that under Obamacare, the microchip is part of the system and is to be installed in every American by 2018. Now, just like the delay in the state certification for international identification, which is now delayed for years, which is under the Bush administration when that bill was passed. Believe it or not, they do include that. And they also include, believe it or not, an ICD-9 code that the guillotine is a medical treatment. Believe it or not. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but unfortunately it's true. The death panels are the most obvious thing. And in fact, I heard a video clip of Obama talking about the fact that he's now no longer young, his hair is old and gray, and he's just waiting for his death panel. I mean, sarcasm aside, this is very scary because a lot of people, if you're older, you don't qualify for even conventional chemotherapy or a clipped aneurysm in your brain. So a lot of very evil things are going on in this nation, and I have to tell you, this election cycle is very concerning to me, both on the behavior of the Republican Party with the conservatives there and people who try to pretend they're outside, like Ted Cruz. Creepy Ted, I would call him, rather than just lying Ted, creepy and lying. He reminds me of Eddie Munster's grandfather, the vampire, and his cohort, Carly Fiorina, is not quite as scary, but she's creepy too. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to bring Matt on at the bottom of the hour in a few minutes, and we'll talk about these symbology tied in with these issues. And I think it's important to understand that people know that what's going on is going to affect their health care. And the reason is, here in America, we have freedom. We ship, for example, nutraceuticals to all places in the world. Many of them in Europe, for example, are under what's called the Codex Alimentarius. Codex basically means in many of these countries, when they listen to our show, they can hear freedom of speech, which they can't in Europe. If we speak against Islam, if we talk about nutraceuticals, if we give alternative care, in many parts, for example, in countries like Canada, you'd be in big trouble. We have also here in America lots of issues that are stymieing medical advancement. For example, we need to get rid of state licensing authorities, malpractice, fee-for-service, a system where big insurance carriers are interposed between the patients and the doctors and health providers. We don't have what we call rationalization of technology, so every city has more than they need in terms of scanners and radiologists and specialists, but they don't have enough primary doctors. And they don't have a system where the doctor has a number of nurse practitioners and other co-professionals such as chiropractors, massage therapists, naturopaths, and dietitians. So the doctors should not be seeing more than 1 or 2 patients an hour. They shouldn't be seeing a zillion patients, racing in another room trying to pretend that all of a sudden they have, their magic script. They can write another prescription as they terminate the interview. This is why things are out of control. So it's important to understand that. I want to encourage people to be callers. When you call, there's three rules. First things, number 1, no ad hominem attacks. Number 2, stay on the topic. If it's open lines and anything, just call in and tell the board op exactly what your questions are in very precise terms, what your bullet points of your statements are, so we can decide will we bring you on or not. Secondly, don't have so many questions that we have to cut you off, because we have other callers and we have a guest. And so we want to make sure that you have good questions and that they're relevant to other people listening. Remember, now we're preparing information for the general public so they can make valid medical decisions. You're not going to get this information, by the way, in other radio shows or television shows on the internet. For example, I turn on shows like Dr. Oz, and he'll promote some product or other. This guy is a yahoo. He mentioned one thing or another, and he really doesn't practice functional medicine. He doesn't understand the complexities of epigenetics, and he's one of the best of the lot. So you're going to get the best information and advice here that integrates the best of medical care, surgical care, chiropractic, massage, radiology, toxicology, epigenetics. You're going to find the best right here. Just make good questions, and I'll give you good answers. 800-313-9443 is the call-in number. We'll be back in a moment with a report show on Republic Broadcasting, and I have to say I'm really impressed with the board ops in this station. It's amazing. And by the way, I want to make a quick announcement that right after this show, one of the long-term top hosts over at Genesis Network has now come over here. I was actually planning to come over on May 2nd, but of course they cut me off early at Genesis Network, and people know the story if they've listened to it or checked the archives when I interviewed on the 14th with John Stadtmuller on his show. But Mike Rivera will be starting right after this program. You'll be hearing Mike. What really happened. He's got an amazing show. Do want to listen to that. We are joined with Matthew Deagle, my oldest son. And Matthew is an expert on analyzing symbology and the psychology and all the elements. He's got his website, MatthewDeagle.com, MatthewDeagle.com. And you've been doing a show over at Rents. I think we're going to be doing an interview after this show today on live stream and transferring it over to Vimeo. Tell us where we want to talk about today is about the symbology and the analysis of what's going on in this election cycle and where this is all going, because I'm very concerned of the issues that are happening, that Donald Trump, who very probably could be a solution to the problem, may get the nomination with a lot of battling going on, but I'm very concerned that despite the probability that Hillary Clinton should be prosecuted, that Comey is either going to not prosecute or she's going to get a pardon from Obama, because she's probably got things on him. And we're likely going to be stuck with Hillary Clinton as our president, and it's going to be horrendous. So I'm very concerned that, the geopolitics will convert the possibility of Donald Trump into what I call a cathartic event, just like going to a colon therapist. It will not solve the problems because they'll polarize society even more by the things happening. What do you think, Matthew? Where are we going, and what's the symbology behind the current events? Because the latest move by people like Ted Cruz is it's creepy, isn't it?
Yes, indeed. It's funny enough, if anybody goes and listens to my interview from Jeff Rentz's program, Third Hour on Wednesday.
Wednesday, you're talking about was that the 20th?
Last Wednesday or so. Right, I was on Jeff Rentz.
And by the way, that hour is over. You've transferred it over to your website, MatthewDeagle.com.
I was on the Wednesday before last. I was on, Rentz Radio. And funnily enough, my description, I was discussing the character type of these people, these candidates that we're dealing with here, because I think ultimately, no matter what the person's apparent ideology or their political affiliation, ultimately you want to look at their character.
Right.
Their character ultimately is going to tell you how they're going to behave in office and what their real inner motivation is. And funnily enough, based on the time of his birth and the symbolism around him and his behavior, I described Ted Cruz as being a kind of wolf in sheep's clothing, like the wolves in sheep's clothing we were warned about by Jesus in the Bible.
Right.
The ones we have to watch out for, and so we have to be as wise as serpents and as without fault as doves, or whatever the translation happens to be. And I mean, everybody knows that passage, right? But they come to you as wolves in sheep's clothing. So I described him as both that and as my words were literally Satan incarnate, which is then exactly what John Boehner, the exact words. I don't know if you listened to the program or what, but then just this week last week, John Boehner was in front of an audience at a university, and he said the exact same thing, that he was Lucifer in the flesh. Yeah,
I think that there's a level of what I call collective consciousness where the creep index, if they try to say all the negatives about Donald Trump, but to be honest with you, most of it's whipped out by the media because he's not a misogynist.
It's all propaganda. No, look, Donald Trump, I've analyzed his character and Ted Cruz, and I've analyzed Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Donald Trump is just a fiery person. He's somebody who's blunt and has a little bit of a tendency to overlook the consequences of his statements in terms of agitation and that sort of thing.
Right.
Overall, though, he's relatively honest, maybe to a fault. The problem with Hillary is that she's more of a deceptive, slimy person. She's more of I describe her as a serpentine person or a snake-like person.
That's a very good analysis.
By the way the snake kills its prey. wraps itself around them and gradually kind of hugs them to death. That's what Hillary Clinton does. It's what a lot of Democrats do, actually, is they kind of smother you. I call it snuggling to death.
That's funny.
It's kind of like they come in as Barney and they end up with their mouth around you at the end.
Right.
On the other, that's the way Merkel is over in Germany too. Look at, she's destroying Germany with her immigration policy, and yet she does it all with this cheerful, supposedly pitying and compassionate attitude.
Yeah, which
now,
is,
of course, I'm all for relieving the poor. Like, I agree with a lot of Bernie Sanders' propositions. I don't think he's a bad guy himself, maybe a bit misled in some respects. But I don't think that's what people like Hillary Clinton are about. They don't care about relieving the poor in the sense of charity and helping people out. It's just their excuse to put more hands in the power of centralized totalitarian government, really. And to put more, the thing is, they don't want to have something like a reverse income tax, which would actually work. They want to have more taxes just going to the government, where we don't know where they're going to end up. But
for example, when you hear Ted Cruz talk about a flat tax, the conservative element within both Republicans and Democrats don't want a flat tax. That's their honeypot that they can get corruption from. So a reverse tax. Talk about what is a reverse tax and how it would solve the problem for the poor.
Tax, it would be, instead of having a minimum wage or having social programs to replace wages, what you do is you simply equalize wages by giving back, by taking income tax from above a certain bracket of wages and giving that to the lower bracket of wages. So if people are below a living wage, if they can't afford health insurance, for example, they simply get a certain amount of money from the government instead of having income tax taken out. There's no need for a tax refund because they simply don't get taxes taken out of their salary to begin with. They get the opposite, a reverse income tax.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's better than a minimum wage because minimum wage will destroy jobs and a lot of small business people won't be able to afford to hire more people.
Yeah, actually,
and this idea,
in a free market system, minimum wage is usually a bad idea because it does shrink the job market. Obviously, the market value of your labor isn't necessarily going to be a living wage.
Now, the other thing is we don't control costs. I mentioned the same thing with healthcare. We have state licensing authorities. I'm writing a paper, by the way. We had several interviews now with Roger Stone, who'll be back. And the 7-point plan that Trump has, which I'm going to expand upon, there's a number of reasons why the system can't work. And by the way, these social countries like Canada, Europe, and so on with fee-for-service, this doesn't work either. It stymies new medical developments and also...
Some of that tax money always ends up in things like surveillance and excessive military spending.
Well, let's talk about that, Matt, because...
Do we use so many bombs, for example? It's just because it makes a profit for the war profiteers. Bombs are very sloppy and unstrategic in most cases. They're useful in some cases, right? If you want to hit a bunker or something. But if you're hitting a civilian surrounded target, it's going to create collaterals. It's destructive and sloppy. The solution generally in all these conflicts, like in ISIS, the conflict in Iraq, even with Iraq War I, with Saddam Hussein, is generally to have an overwhelming number of troops on the ground, not to drop tons of bombs. The thing is, bombs are more profitable for these criminal companies who then take our tax money and spend it on bombs that are up to hundreds of thousands of dollars a piece.
Right.
Totally ridiculous, wasteful spending, and murderous. Just one of the worst possible.
Here's the comments by Ted Cruz. He's going to talk about carpet bombing, which is a Geneva violation. It's like, are you kidding?
That right there shows how much of a psychopath he is. He's talking about carpet bombing civilians.
Now, did you see his father stomping around looking like, with this look on his face like, I'm the authority? And he's literally publicly in Indiana cursing Donald Trump. He calls himself a Christian. Ted Cruz's father would qualify as a high-level Satanist.
He's a good example, him and Mitt Romney and many others, of how diluted the notion of a Christian has become. That somebody who...
Well, that's why we have Tex Marzon.
Who kisses the feet of heretics over in Judaism, who just, in general is a very bad figure as far as any kind of Christian standard goes. I'm sure Jesus wouldn't agree with corporate raiding that Mitt Romney does. I'm sure he wouldn't agree with carpet bombing, etc. I'm not speaking for Jesus, but I think you can read the Bible.
Oh, no, he was Jesus said on the two commandments that he said is love God with your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. Neither of these people, in fact, this is why we call a happy church. And I live in North County, San Diego, and to be honest with you, I can't find a public church that I can go to without causing trouble. I'm going to start asking questions. And
the churches have basically, all of them have degenerated toward a kind of materialism, embracing things that were formerly regarded as horrendous sins, like murder and usury, for example, or the charging of interest on loans. Banking's taken such power and control. That's what the EU ultimately is. It's ultimately the central bank, the European Central Bank, right?
Right. Because most of the countries want to leave the euro, but they can't because they're actually shackled now by the euro system, aren't they?
And that's what you were talking earlier. You wanted me to discuss more general symbolism and trends.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Well, the European Union definitely relates to that. Because, namely, the European Union is, along with a certain element in the CIA here in the U.S., an international world domination-seeking, agitating element that is provoking Russia, that is stirring up trouble in the Middle East, putting Islamic terrorists in power, etc., involves many shady figures that don't even have public personas or have multiple public personas or pseudonyms. It's just so shady. You don't even know who these people are, but you know what they're doing because you can observe their actions and you can follow the paper trail that at least leads to these intelligence agencies and to the European Union and connects to the European Central Bank, that there is some kind of shadow government taking over the West and attempting to take over the world, which is partly embodied in the so-called European Union. Really what it ultimately is some kind of secularization of the imperial power of the Catholic Church and Judaism, as well as the CIA, all kind of connected together into this dark, nebulous entity that, as far as its outward manifestation, is this European Union and NATO. Now, NATO itself has done good, right? I think the idea of an international peacekeeping force is excellent. The problem with NATO now is that the European Union virtually controls NATO. So does the U.S. on a unilateral, biased basis, where we simply use it to provoke Russia, not to create peace, right? Like what we did in Bosnia was relatively good, but what we're doing now is the exact opposite. We're going to start World War III if we continue with this.
Well, look what's going on with Obama. I'd like you to expand on this because the symbology. Obama, on the one hand, is acting like the Mahdi, trying to bring peace externally between Sunni and Shiite Islam, but he's arming to the teeth so that the so-called peace treaty they had with Russia, the Peshmerga forces, which are the Kurds and the Syrians, is broken now. And just a few days ago, something like 250 people died in Aleppo because of the bombing happening from Turkey. And they have man-pads, all kinds of advanced weapons, and they're all American weapons given to these ISIS and ISIL, which we support. So Obama is out of his mind, and he's evil, and he's now deploying nuclear weapons, first-strike nuclear weapons, on the Russian-Polish border. He's just asking to start World War III, isn't he?
Yeah, and it's not just him. You have to understand, Obama is just the president of the U.S.
Right.
The actual federal government here isn't actually the problem. It might seem that way, but what's happening here is there's an organization, a shadow government behind it and behind the European Union, which has its central power in the NSA and CIA.
Exactly.
And, honestly, I think that this NSA, CIA, this element that Edward Snowden is exposing, which is already surveilling us all, getting ready to turn us into a cashless society, I think it is the prophesied Beast 666.
Oh, yeah. And the central node of that, by the way, is at Schriever Air Force Base, Falcon, Colorado.
Now, I know lots of people have made these prophecies, and have said these prophecies have been fulfilled before, but at this point in history, it's really happening because our technologies have reached the level where it can happen.
Yeah, by the way, 3Com, which is the phone system in China, is completely controlled by the NSA. Did you know that's 3Com? So in every country on earth, every language, every email, every phone fax. So when Snowden says this, he's actually just touching the top of the mountain. There's a mountain of surveillance and also artificial intelligence. This system has, with Promise Software, using AI to track and control everybody in a virtual world.
Yeah, and I think what's happening right now is that a lot of these events are being machinated by either a small group of people inside the CIA or NSA, or even a single individual who you might call the Antichrist or something like that. I prefer to call him the pseudo-Christ because that's the actual original Greek.
Yeah.
A false Messiah.
Yeah,
now,
a replacement Messiah is what you're saying.
Pseudo means false, not replacement, right?
Yeah.
The word Antichrist that shows up in the Bible.
Yeah, it's
the
a false one.
Is actually what's in the Bible, pseudo-Christos in Greek, which means a false savior. Somebody who pretends they're coming to save you, but is really coming to enslave you or to take or to control you. That is literally what's going on here. We are experiencing the false savior in the form of, now think about this. The United Nations recently published a report stating that by 2030 or 2040, between those 2 years, the current water shortage will reach catastrophic levels, which means that the entire Middle East may not be able to sustain itself with its own water supply. It may depend on American crops almost entirely to survive, or other foreign crops. Think about the opportunity for alliances and scuffles between large superpowers in that region. Not good. Furthermore, because of the rising sea levels, Bangladesh, the entire country, is going to sink, or much of the country is going to sink into the ocean with 300 million Muslims who will then become refugees. Who's going to take them on? Who's going to take on all these refugees? Who's going to feed all these starving people? Well, I think it's going to be this pseudo-Christ, at least in part. That's part of how he'll come to power.
Right.
Because
we talked about that with Jonathan Gray. Will be on if we can track him down in the third hour.
System. Because first of all, this mass surveillance system has already concentrated power in the hands of these people who also have access to all the most top secret technologies and therefore solutions to many of these problems. The United States of America already produces a large portion of the world's crops in the Corn Belt, and we will therefore be in the position as America and as the European Union to be the pseudo-Christ or the false Messiah going around the world supplying aid and support and succor to all of these famined peoples who then will become our subjects, the subjects of the USA, EU, or B666.
Yeah.
Ultimately, however, I think this will lead to such an incredible concentration of power in the hands of this European Union, which will be the main organization that, and the group of seven, right? The G7 and the European Union will have such power that, and will be concentrated in the hands of these NSA people, that it will lead to World War IV. World War III.
Keep that thought, Matt. We'll be back in a moment with the next short segment. And we're trying to track down Jonathan Gray. Maybe a good idea for you to stay around with Jonathan, because we're going to talk about the third jihad in his 4-DVD set, the extras and more. And I'm sure you'll have some good questions for Jonathan when we come back.